Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? It is Thursday, January 4th, 2018. I think I mentioned yesterday, I forgot to tell you what date it was. That is probably okay for almost all listeners, with the exception of President Donald Trump, who would need a reminder every 10 minutes or so. According to articles published yesterday, in fact, one during the show, that we didn't realize what a big bombshell this thing was going to become. The Guardian article that Armando referred us to early in the morning. Interesting. Well worth talking about for a long time, and of course, I guess inspired by the release of Michael Wolff's book, but it wasn't until the excerpts began to get published during the day yesterday that people really began talking about just how impactful this thing is. And I guess the jury is still out on how accurate / well-reported / well-sourced / true / haha, whatever, this whole book is. Of course, it's being disputed by the White House. They have to, otherwise they immediately have to resign, and everybody should be, basically jailed for having having foisted this guy on the country and the world in the first place. But first we'll have to have an internal debate here in America about, whether or not he ought to be allowed to continue in office, I suppose. Although, I guess we won't get to that debate first. First, we'll get to the debate over whether or not Steve Bannon is crazy, as he was quoted in the story we read yesterday and in the book throughout, bashing the hell out of the Donald Trump, the White House, the administration, the persona. Not really exactly what we expected, I guess, from Bannon anytime soon. But, I guess we're glad to have it. But make no mistake, I think we were pretty clear yesterday in saying he's not your friend because he's doing this. He has his own agenda here. And as I tweeted yesterday afternoon, as I began to see this emerging theme out there on Twitter of journalists and others saying, I really wasn't expecting this whole Steve Bannon becoming a hero of the resistance thing, and I don't really know. I wasn't keeping track on who was saying what in that respect. Why would I track what people's reaction to Steve Bannon is and how they regard him? He's a horrible person and deserves none of your sympathies, support, or whatever. I'm glad he said what he said. I can't promise you any of it is true or even close to true. He's a fabulist and a despicable person, but he's convinced Michael Wolff that it's true, and Michael Wolff apparently has plenty of evidence to back up his assertions. We'll see whether any of it holds up. It's evidence. It might not be very good, but we'll find out, and I'll enjoy finding out. But I don't know who was holding up Steve Bannon as a hero of the resistance unless it was being done tongue-in-cheek, which is possible. To be clear, my policy on Steve Bannon is I am glad you said what you said, and I still think you should be pushed through a wood chipper. I will say, as the blade of the guillotine comes down, thanks for blabbing to Michael Wolff. That was great, but, your crimes against the country, so what can I do? Can't really help you. The appeals process having been exhausted, unless you can get that panel of judges that reversed the state delegates election in Virginia to help you out after the fact. Your objections are noted, but just not timely made. I'm sorry I can't help you. I'm speaking figuratively, of course, because how else could you possibly interpret that? Anyway, plenty to talk about today, and it is Thursday, and the kids are home from school. We were hit by the major blizzard here in the Washington, D.C. area. It was about an inch of snow. And the school's closed. It's freezing cold out. There's no doubt about that. And the snow fell at just the right time to avoid being taken care of efficiently by plows before the buses had to run. And that, combined with the wind chill out at the bus stops, I guess, convinced them to close the place down. I expect they may close it down tomorrow for similar reasons, but not the major storm that it was supposed to be up north. It was never supposed to be like that here. How are things in Connecticut, Greg? I don't know either. Okay, how come I can't hear you? That's odd. Well, let us say that you'll give us a call back. The music sounded really good, and it's always fun to hear it, so let's try it again. Greg, hi. I think I hear you already.
Hi, is that all right?
Yeah, that's better. Your first call was snowed out, but that's okay. You made a second call very quickly. What's the weather like up there in Connecticut?
Well, we're having a snow-nado, so, it's kind of snowing here.
Okay.
And because of that, and because we're in the middle of that, what's going to happen is I'll do my best to get everything I have to say before the break.
Yeah.
And then shortly after the break, I have to run off to work and give myself a little extra time.
Okay, so it's not quite the blizzard that's knocked everything out, but it's going to make trouble. Okay, I'll let you get to it.
Anyway, there's interesting things happening, I think, all over.
Are there?
And, one of the interesting things, I hope the sound is okay. For some reason, the computer is acting very strangely this morning.
You sound okay to me.
I sound okay, but I'm hearing you through the speakers instead of my headphone.
Oh.
And I don't know
I won't
why.
say anything then.
Yeah. So we're going to see if we can fix that. But in the meantime, here's what's happening. So we have this whole thing with the Michael Wolff book. And one of the important things to come out this morning, Axios had this, is that Wolff has hours and hours and hours of tape.
I hope there's tapes.
So, Lordy, there's tapes. He's got all of this, and including some of the stuff that he was supposedly talking about in regard to the dinner here or there that he quotes from a Roger Ailes discussion, for example. He was the one hosting the dinner. So, yes, he has played fast and loose with the facts in the past, but this is kind of a forest and trees kind of discussion. The forest is burning. Everybody in D.C. knows it. The whole book is permission structure to talk about what everybody already knows is true. And every once in a while, somebody will say, oh, but look at that tree over there. Did you notice on the bottom branch, 3 of the leaves are not on fire?
Aha.
And he said it was, so therefore the whole thing is wrong.
Like
well, no, that's not how it works. And so whereas the original stuff is, I don't know how much this is true. That was yesterday. By this morning, it's like, it's all true. Come on. Everybody knows it's true. And in fact, there's a follow-up piece, not just the book, but today in Hollywood Reporter, Michael Wolff has a follow-up article. You can't make this crap up. My year inside Trump's insane White House, with some amazing quotes in here.
Yeah, I just saw that one. I opened it up myself, but if you got any highlights, let us know.
Oh, yeah, there's great ones. Basically, he says that nobody expected him to survive Mueller. Whatever the substance of the Russia collusion, Trump, in the estimation of his senior staff, didn't have the discipline to navigate a tough investigation. Everybody was painfully aware of the increasing pace of his repetitions. Used to be inside of 30 minutes, he'd repeat word for word and expression for expression the same 3 stories. Now it was within 10 minutes.
That's good.
He talks a lot about the inside stuff, about how people felt about Hope Hicks, his real daughter, and Ivanka, his real wife. Steve Bannon openly handicapping a 33% chance of impeachment, 33% chance of resignation. But this is Mar-a-Lago just before the new year. A heavily made-up Trump failed to recognize a succession of old friends.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some, pretty disturbing stuff in here that, again, is not unknown to everybody who's been paying attention. But they all also, go along with the book in terms of everybody saying that he's bored, he's incompetent, he really is not the person who ought to be running the country, and everybody knows it. It's kind of that thing. And since everybody in Washington does know it, but you're not allowed to say it, you're kind of saying it now. That's the Trump side of the Michael Wolff. The other side, of course, is Steve Bannon being on record.
Yes.
On record as saying this remarkable quote, even if you thought this was not treasonous, talking about Don Jr. in the meeting with the Russians, even if you thought this was not treasonous or unpatriotic or bad crap, and I happen to think it's all of that, you should have called the FBI immediately, Steve Bannon is quoted as saying. And so the implication there is that that meeting with Don Trump Jr. and the Russians was enormous and huge, and Trump and Trump Jr. concocting on the plane what to say about it was obstruction of justice. That's the implication of all of this. And as James Hohmann points out in his summary this morning, the big idea is that none of this is normal. Try to picture Barack Obama declaring that David Axelrod has lost his mind, or George W. Bush saying Karl Rove is learning that winning isn't as easy as I make it look, or Bill Clinton's lawyer sending James Carville a cease and desist letter.
Yeah, although that may yet happen.
Yeah, it may, but just to put it in perspective.
Yes.
Or Robbie Mook saying that Chelsea Clinton is dumb as a brick, which is what they said about Ivanka.
And well, it rings true. I'll say that.
Well, it may, but that's the thing. It all rings true. So the fact that all of this is being discussed all of a sudden, it's not like it's a revelation. Everybody kind of knew this, but now they're saying it out loud, and they're saying it out loud in the context of Trump reacting to it by sending a cease and desist letter to Steve Bannon, claiming he signed a NDA.
That's going to be good.
As if that applies to the government, which it doesn't. And, of course, many, many times, as we all know, Trump threatens to sue somebody but doesn't actually sue him, so I don't know what that means.
Right. We may find out that it means nothing. He may follow through on this one, maybe not. I don't know if he'll win it. I don't think so. But, we're still waiting for him to sue all the women who accused him of molesting them, of course.
Well, but at the same time, the other side of the coin is that the Bannon star is in the process of flaming out. You step back and look at it, and also note that Rebecca Mercer's pulling all her money out of Bannon and saying, I don't want to have anything to do with this guy anymore, which is what she said yesterday. So he loses his financial patron. He loses his political patron in Trump yesterday. And a lot of the fringy kind of candidates that Bannon was backing as primary opponents to the establishment and Republicans themselves are saying, I don't want to have anything to do with Bannon. I'm for Trump.
Yeah. That's I hear myself on that one.
I know. So that's why I have to fix the speakers here. So Bannon is the big loser.
It certainly sounds like it. And losing the Mercers is a huge deal. I have always maintained that there's nothing he's ever, quote unquote, accomplished in politics or media that they haven't paid for. So I'm pretty sure that could cause a lot of problems for him. Just like, a little worse than the audio problems that we seem to be having. Greg says he's going to hang up and call back. He's going to fiddle around with his speakers a little bit. There we are. We get to hear the music one more time. All right. We'll see how this one goes.
No better. This is so weird because I'm on the headphones until I use Skype, and then when I call Skype, it switches to speaker, so it comes over the microphone.
Well, okay. Well, I'll send you an email about where that might be buried after we're done. Yeah,
please, because I can't figure that out. That's like all of a sudden and hasn't happened before. In any case, Armando rightly points out that, it's not like you can trust any of these gonifs, to tell you the truth. I don't trust Bannon. I don't trust the Mercers. I don't trust Wolf. I don't trust any, but it doesn't matter. It's all true anyway.
Yes. It's true you can't trust any of them, and that makes it tough to figure out what to do with these guys. But for right now, I'm happy to just repeat the stories.
So, in any case, so then, while all of this is going on, you have Trump being portrayed as uninformed, unprepared, and lacking focus in this book, which I think in and of itself is a big deal. I think that the issues in regard to his ability to function are extremely compromised. I had a whole series yesterday in the Pundit Roundup about how the rest of the world looks at it. There was a Susan Glasser piece about Donald Trump's year of living dangerously.
Okay.
About how everybody else in the world thinks he's crazy. The guy's insane. There are psychiatrists now briefing Democrats in Congress about whether or not he's insane. That actually happened.
Wow.
And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on in regard to, his capacity, his ability to actually function the way he's supposed to. And it's all kind of scary, but it's all chaos. It's all chaotic. And again, I have to go back to stuff you and I talked about a year ago. Chaos is and has been a part of this from the very beginning. And the whole idea that it's not is just crazy. And that gets to how it's covered by the media.
Yes. Well, you have been adamant in reminding us about the chaos. Where I depart from others who have adopted a similar drumbeat about chaos is where they claim that chaos is the strategy. And it might have been somebody else's strategy.
He has no idea what he's doing. Right. He makes it up as he goes along.
That's the thing. Yeah, we're now understanding that now that might have been something that people around him constructed either for their own sense of safety, like this is not an out of control, burning stagecoach barreling through town. It's a strategy. It's now become clear that, and certainly other people have claimed that was Bannon's strategy all along. But as far as Trump being strategically chaotic, it's just he just has no idea either what he's doing or what he just did 10 minutes ago.
Right. And all of that is just a huge problem. Let's see if I can adjust this microphone thing here as we go along.
A lot of huge problems.
No, I don't think we can.
I'm sorry. To hear that.
So back to the show.
Yes.
It's amazing watching the media try to deal with this, because all of the courtiers, all the ones who have been, trying to pretend it's all normal, and I'm going to earnestly report into the camera and the microphone what Donald Trump and Huckabee Sanders just said today in the afternoon briefing. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Yes.
And so when something like this comes out, it embarrasses all of them. The New York Times, cable TV, everybody who was normalizing Trump and trying to treat him as if he's a serious president, when in fact he's incompetent.
Yeah.
He is unfit for office. This book makes it so clear, and again adds that permission structure that people are saying that today. And, at least yesterday it was a little bit of a worry that folks are going to get distracted about the Trump-Bannon, steel cage match and forget about the substance of what was actually in the book. But the substance of what's actually in the book is just so significant. And because it's true, and because everybody in Washington knows it's true, it's reverberating today in ways that are just profoundly more important than whether or not Bannon and Trump are fighting, and whether or not the Mercers are or aren't going to fund Bannon in the future.
Yes, very hard to prioritize.
But if you're having a political fight, Trump wins the fight and Bannon loses, because Bannon doesn't have a lot of support. And that's because if you want to hitch your wagon to somebody who's going to help your career, you're better off with Trump than Bannon at the moment. Trump is still president and Bannon is nothing.
Yeah. How embarrassing must that be, by the way, for Steve Bannon, who considers himself a world-class genius, right?
And kingmaker, who, in fact, might run for president in 2020 if Trump doesn't, according to the book, according to previous articles. Yeah, I mean, what does that do to him? He doesn't care, because he's as big an egoist as Trump is.
Yeah, and he'll apparently have to push Ivanka and then Jared out of the way.
Which is what he'd like to do.
Yeah, I'm sure. But in order to contend for the presidency, apparently those two have decided they will be president, and they have an agreement between them as to who goes first, and the answer is Ivanka.
Right, that way she can be the first female president. I mean, the part about being dumb as a brick, I think, is true.
Yeah, well, apparently it seems true. But how would you feel, I guess, if you were a guy who considered himself a world-class intellect, and the cage match between you and the senile idiot went the senile idiot's way?
Well, you can't fight family because family can't get fired.
True. Oh, no, we're talking – that's the not yet senile idiot.
That was an unequal playing field to begin with. But the people he'd really like to take on, Bannon, isn't so much Trump. It's the globalists.
Yeah.
You can put your parentheses around people like Gary Cohn.
Right.
or what he considers globalists, which is Javanka.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, now he's got a couple of fights with different Trumps going on. I just was thinking
he's going to lose them all.
Yes.
But, there it is.
But in terms of the political battle for the future of whatever movement he thinks he's leading, I gather that he must have thought at some point, I'm going to come out on top in the Steve Bannon versus Donald Trump contest because he's a senile idiot and I'm a world-class genius. And then he found out within a matter of hours, people were saying, all of this is true. I also have observed that he's incompetent to the job. I'm hitching my wagon to him anyway, and deliberately opting to steer myself away from the so-called, political genius. He's in cognitive decline, and I'd rather be associated with him than you.
Yeah.
That's
so
something.
So you have that, and so Bannon is, I think, going to find out that without the White House prestige of making people think you know what you're doing, and especially after the Roy Moore loss, that Bannon was backing Roy Moore.
Yes,
he's got nothing, and he's going to lose a fight over Trump's family with Trump because he can't win that, and the general group of Republicans. I mean, one of the funniest things was the tweet from Team Mitch McConnell's group.
I did see that. Although
with Mitch happily nodding his head and laughing in a one of those loop gifs that plays over and over and over.
Yeah.
At the time that Bannon self-immolated. Right. And so the establishment Republicans find themselves in a stronger position. Trump finds himself in a weaker position, and that political reality is one of the reasons why Bannon was a big loser here.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, long term,
well.
Bannon did something that can't be undone, just like some things that are seen cannot be unseen, and that is to verify that, in fact, what Mueller is doing is no witch hunt, and in fact there is stuff here going on that was so disturbing to Bannon, according to the book, that he felt like they should go to the FBI with it. And when your chief strategist, who is there, is reporting that kind of stuff, it cuts the legs out of the whole Republican argument that this is a witch hunt and we have to go after Mueller and the FBI, which is what Jim Jordan and the Freedom Caucus was attempting to do poorly, I might add. But now it's just impossible to do after all of this.
Well, we'll see whether they continue trying.
They can try, but it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I wonder whether they'll continue
They
trying.
They will continue because they have nothing else.
Oh,
but again, let's not mistake what they do with what works.
That's true. I have never made that mistake.
No, we have to be careful about that.
Okay.
So that's my trying to pull together all the pieces of the chaos and, trying to add a little finesse-manship here to it to try to, explain what's going on in what is clearly a big hot mess. And I'll try to pay attention to the snownado going on here, but the crap storm in D.C., I think, is a much bigger one.
It is a big one. It's very difficult to prioritize today. I did see, I think I embedded in the Morning Post Steve Singeiser's tweet about things this morning. Also, Bill and Hillary Clinton's house caught on fire yesterday. And you may have missed that story because it's that kind of a day. It didn't even crack the headlines.
It was a little bit of a fire,
here and there.
Nice.
But usually when a former president's house catches fire, it usually makes the news. Also, the James Risen story. I know a lot of journalists are tearing their hair out. Oh, my God, another Trump is a moron story. Well, but the one that you guys haven't reported yet and have been avoiding reporting.
Well, there's also the end of the voter fraud commission.
Right.
Which itself is a fraud.
Yes, it is, and it really imploded under the weight of about 16 different problems.
Spectacular fashion.
Yes, and not the least of which I only discovered today, although apparently it was reported back in October, that they had a little bit of an issue having to clean the pedophiles out. As a matter of fact, one of the researchers hired by one of the top Republican lieutenants on the commission brought along with him a guy who had worked with him before as an intern and I guess set him up in a fantastic job that they just had a hell of a time purging him from, until he was finally arrested with child pornography on his computer.
Oh, it's so sad how Denny Hastert has fallen.
I said they sure do love pedophiles in that party. I must say, they keep turning up everywhere, and it's a hell of a thing to try to make them.
Danny, I know you're just out of prison, but let me offer you this job, okay? And try not to screw up.
Really, but nope, it didn't work. Oh no, it's a totally different child pornographer.
Completely different guy. You have so many there in the Republican Party.
It's hard to keep track of them. True. All right, but I would not have. It's amazing what we've been having to try and absorb over the last couple of months, and that we would have missed this story is pretty amazing. But that wasn't even what did them in. But thankfully, I think they're finally done. Trump has, in fact, dissolved them. I don't think we got video of that signing ceremony, but yes, glad to note that one anyway.
But they are making noises. Chris Kobach just saying, "Hey, well, don't you libs shouldn't celebrate too quickly. We're moving all our stuff to ICE, and we'll have them do it."
Yeah, right. Well,
what does that mean?
Not really sure. Yeah, I guess they take all their data and declare everybody on their list who's registered as a Democrat to be an illegal alien and see whether they get deported.
Mm.
That's a strategy.
So, it's more of the same. If anybody thought 2018 was going to be a better year, or that Trump was suddenly going to magically pivot to being president, we haven't even talked about North Korea
yesterday
and his finger on the nuclear button there.
Right.
But the guy is insane, and he shouldn't be president. He's incompetent. He's unreliable. He doesn't deserve to be in the White House. And, the question as to what happens is an open question right now, at least discussed not in secret and not behind the back of your hand, but in full open and on cable TV today. So we'll see what comes of that.
I am prepared to see. We'll find out. Okay. Well, it's been a hell of a start. I don't know if
it's been real.
Yes, and it's all true.
It's all true.
You let me know
if parts of it aren't.
Okay. Well, be careful out there in the snow today.
Thank you, and I'll check back with you on Monday. We actually have a Monday show now.
Yes. All right, we're wrapping it up. Thanks very much, Greg. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We had a little bit of difficulty getting Greg's audio straightened out. He's fiddling with it right now. We will hold his segment in abeyance until Monday, unless, of course, I left the door open. If he thinks he's got the thing fixed and wants to just test it out, we'll indulge that here. Armando has been typing furiously in the background. Armando, you too are welcome to chime in. But, yeah, this is a day, I don't know whether we should just sit around and try to absorb all of this nonsense and try and just comment on it, or should we move to other stories that are otherwise big stories that aren't getting the oxygen they need? Can we handle those? Am I always going to come back to this? I don't know. I'm not sure. Armando's comments to date, I guess we'll try and match them up with things we said along the way, now that we can look back on them. On the Mercers, of course, he was saying, I wouldn't trust anything that they say. And that's not going to happen anytime soon. Not for me, anyway. Yes, and he says, by the way, they were shocked to discover Milo was whatever Milo is. That's true. The Mercers are not sophisticated political players by most reports. I mean, they play at the highest levels. They just didn't really have any clear idea what they were doing. Oh, okay, let's see. Armando could not resist the siren call here. Good morning, Armando. How you doing?
Hey, How you
Yes.
doing?
Well, the president and saying
Are
whatever.
you fired up? Are you?
Yeah.
Are you,
Look at this.
Are you digging all the chaos?
Yeah, hold on just a second here. I think Greg is trying to come in here. Greg, hi.
Hey, how are you?
I'm fine. Any better for you here?
Much better. All of a sudden, it's through my headphones again.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
I just
good news.
turned off Skype and then turned Skype back on. All of a sudden, it worked.
Yeah.
So not nearly as distracting.
Okay.
So how are you? I haven't spoken to you in a while.
Yeah, let me see if I can add Armando into our conversation here.
Oh, that'd be great.
Let's
Can
see.
you?
Well, it's thinking about it. I think it may be.
It's an open question. I mean, when we
Yeah.
say stuff like that, it's not like it automatically happens.
Right. I mean, it used to be very easy to just add a third party. I put him on hold. I'm sure I confused him in doing so to pick up for you because I know you needed to just see if you figure out if you got it. All right. Yeah. Let me tell Armando. I guess he's listening. So in about 15 seconds, he'll say.
Do you want to call me? I don't know how this works now. I can hang up and you can call
I
me
will-
from him.
No, stay here. And Armando, who is on hold, should hang up, and then I will call Armando and see if we can add him that way. We'll see whether that works.
Okay, don't try this at home, folks.
Don't try it at all, anywhere. Don't, just please. Okay, let's see. Will this add Armando? This might be, these little symbols going on the screen might be telling me that it's ringing on Armando's end, if he's hung up yet, and he may not have done that. Okay, let's see. Here's my new attempt at this. Okay. We'll have Armando hang up if we can. And, oh, wait a minute. Did Greg just hang up?
I don't know. Did I?
Oh, no, you didn't. Okay, I heard. Okay, there goes. That was them telling me that the other call that was on hold hung up as instructed. Let me see now. Add people. We'll call Armando. I think this little sign on my screen says it's ringing, but it doesn't make the ringing noise in my ear.
And when Armando's on, he'll just say hi and tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, we can begin. Oh, here we go. I think this will work. No, see, it says incoming call from Armando, and if I answer it, it's going to put you on hold.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Well, we can do that. Why don't you talk to him, because I already had my say.
Oh, okay. Well, we can do that's
And
right.
we'll-
So we'll just report that all things are fine, and you can head to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Why don't I do that? Take care, Greg. We'll talk again on Monday. This was scintillating for all our listeners. And all right, we'll try Armando again after this. Okay. Let's see. Now, this really could have been engineered differently, I am sure. All right. Armando, let's see. We'll try you again. Let's see. Boy, this is fun, huh? I will explain this to him when he gets here rather than typing it silently to him. We'll have him call again. Hi, Armando. I'm sorry about that. The old method of adding a third caller has been hidden from me by the new and improved Skype. And
Yeah,
I was
that.
trying to call you to add you back in. I think when that happens and I have to put somebody on hold, it's best to have them just hang up. And I can create a three-way call, but I can't do it with incoming calls. It has to be with outgoing calls. Which actually, I would have thought that made sense as the way to originally engineer Skype, and that the new and improved Skype would allow you to just add callers very easily. They actually did this in reverse. Anyway.
I just assumed this was you just doing a thematic show on Trump chaos.
Yeah, that's right. I'm a method actor, and I'm putting myself in character. I got to put the voice on. And, he's somewhere, scarily enough now, given the last couple of days' worth of tweets, he's sitting around saying, let me just push all the buttons and see which one does what.
Exactly.
And he has to do it again every 10 minutes because he forgets in between.
The new and improved nuclear football.
Right. I was thinking this morning as I was looking at people tweeting around the Hollywood Reporter piece from Michael Wolff about, and in particular, the excerpt about him being in such cognitive decline that he was repeating himself, where he used to repeat himself inside of a half-hour cycle. It had now diminished to a 10-minute cycle. And thinking about the horror and shock of the Joint Chiefs of Staff getting that second phone call 10 minutes later authorizing the same nuclear launch they already sent out from a president who doesn't remember that he did it. and saying, oh, my God, the first one may not have been valid. Why did we do that? And having to explain to him, well, Mr. President, you actually just called and did that. What? No, I didn't. You're crazy. I have to replace you now. You're nuts. And, I can't imagine living with that. I can't imagine sitting in a missile silo, even before we learned about exactly how much his capacity had diminished, thinking about the original thought was, I'm turning the key, if that really happens, like in war games, on a nuclear missile, not knowing whether this was in response to a real threat or a mean tweet or what, and then thinking the updated version of it then became, who's giving this order? Is it Trump? Maybe it's a Trump lawyer drafting the order. Maybe it's whoever just had lunch with Chris Ruddy today at Mar-a-Lago and got him in front of Trump, and that's why I'm launching this nuclear missile. Maybe Russia asked for it. I don't even know who's doing this. And now, of course, it gets to the question of, is this guy even sane, competent? Does he remember what he's saying? Will he remember in 10 minutes? Or as Greg says, what if the second call is don't launch? Or it's a call from Kelly saying, I don't know what just happened, but I came in and I found the president on the hotline phone, and I don't know what he was saying to who. Do you guys know what happened? What do you do with that? I don't know. Right, huh? It's only America. It's only the world, right? Let's roll the dice and see what happens. I'm Ivanka Trump. What's the worst that can happen? I got a bomb shelter. I'm a billionaire, maybe. People think I am. They'll give me a shelter. I could be president later. I don't know. These guys just think nothing bad will happen to him. I thought maybe that was part of Bannon's point yesterday with the Guardian article we were reading, that he was bashing Don Jr. for being such an idiot for taking this meeting. And it didn't seem to me like he was saying, I wouldn't take the meeting, although he was saying, oh, you should call the FBI. That's 20/20 hindsight. He wasn't there, and he's in a fight with Trump now, so he says, sure, call the FBI. I don't think he calls the FBI on himself. But his big thing was Don Trump Jr. is such a moron. He has secret meetings in a giant golden building that has his name on it, that every TV camera in the world is trained on. There was a C-SPAN camera in the lobby, and he's like, I'm going to secret people in and have confidential meetings. They'll never catch me.
I was on Twitter before I go on you and listening to reporters act. This is the one that I wanted to point out to. Yes, Michael Shear, a New York Times reporter, reacting to somebody criticizing reporters generally, not even the New York Times. He says, it's from Marinera, says, there's an important point in Wolf's book, which is based on him actually being in the White House, depicts a much more chaotic and incoherent White House than many media outlets have shown us. Indeed, some have argued their incoherence is strategy. And then Michael Shear, who is a New York Times White House correspondent, answers, this is a ridiculous assertion. The reason you and all of us know about the chaos inside the West Wing is not this book. It is the amazing, brave reporting of people like Maggie Haberman all last year. To suggest otherwise is simply false. Are you freaking kidding me?
I do have another suggestion other than that. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'll leave the floor to you.
Oh, well, no, I know where I think I know where you're going, but I can credit Haberman to some extent. I guess if it placates him and makes him be quiet so we can talk about what's really going on here, I'll do it. But yeah, there's been good reporting that has documented the chaos. What's been missing in all of this is that this isn't a strategy. There's no coherent thought behind it. We've begun to realize it, but reporters, there's no denying that the New York Times, whether at the direction of the editorial staff or the unwillingness or inability of its admittedly sometimes very good reporters to acknowledge this, but they have. It reminds me a whole lot of the torture issue, in that reporters had no framework within which to write such things. It would have been crazy in their view, professionally and politically inside Washington, D.C. to say what was really going on. So they look for a different construct. And that construct is, well, I'm reporting the chaos, so I'm great, but you're reporting it as coherent strategy, which means you're way wrong. And that has the effect of perpetuating the nonsense. It allows it to go on. You dressed it up in, this is literally what I always talk about with American punditry. It doesn't matter what bizarre crap you're spewing, as long as you're wearing a suit and tie and you're being displayed in a little box above a network anchor's shoulder, they let you go. Just say whatever.
That's exactly right, David. And let me put it to you this way. The problem with the New York Times, I don't think their reporting's all that. I think anybody can see what Trump is and what this White House is. Sarah Sanders, Kellyanne Conway. What, are you kidding me? We can't see the chaos? Of course. It's only a person who doesn't want to see it can't see it. But let's assume, okay, that's what you reported. Here's the problem. They editorialize it. Mm-hmm. They don't give us straight report. It's not like, oh, so you got to call it a lie. No, it's not even that. You ran a story. Well, first after the Michael Schmidt interview, they basically blew that story. Peter Baker, who's a smart guy, this is his editor's fault. He writes a story, and I didn't read the story, but I can just tell you what the headline said. Who's writing the headlines?
Yeah.
Trump reinvents presidency by authenticity, and he's not aloof like his predecessors.
Right. That's
editorial.
Yeah, my tweet on this
analysis. Your analysis is terrible. The New York Times political desk is a disaster. It's beyond terrible because it's not Fox News. We know what it is.
Yes.
There's this story. Oh, Hannity gave Trump the questions before he interviewed him.
Right.
Give him the answers too. What do you mean? Of course, it's Hannity. That's what we expect.
Yeah.
The New York Times. The problem with the New York Times, I don't even care what they write. It's the imprimatur that there's some liberal bastion who's holding Trump to account. They're not. If they would shed the paper of record moniker and that status that they have, and they were just some other newspaper, the L.A. Times or the San Antonio Express or whoever, I wouldn't care that they're terrible. It's because they're the New York Times that gives them this power that we need to fight. That's why I have a quixotic, and I tell everybody every day, cancel your subscription to the New York Times. What do I say that? I'm saying it to take away that mantle of, establishment, center-left, liberal idea that this is what the New York Times is. The New York Times is a terrible newspaper right now in its political coverage. It is. And it's not the paper of record. They have bad reporting, particularly bad editing in their political stuff. And to the degree that we can defeat the idea that the New York Times is what people thought it should be, that's what I'm trying to achieve. And if they give that up willingly and say, well, we're just a newspaper, guys. We're doing the best we can. We're not anything special. Good. You suck, but at least you're humble about it. Here this guy's talking about courageous and brave reporting by Maggie Haberman like she went to a war zone.
It's clear that they're going to defend their work. I mean, anybody would, no doubt about that. I picked up on the same thing in that I said yesterday, Wolf's book just completely destroyed this thing. I took the screenshot of the online version of the Peter Baker piece, with the big blaring headline, "For Trump, a year of reinventing the presidency in ways that were once unimaginable. President Trump has discarded the conventions and norms established by his predecessors. Will that change the institution permanently?" And
is that a quote from the story?
That is the headline and subheader of the piece. And
that's disgraceful.
Yeah, I mean, I just said Wolf's book just, as I said, S word, S-canned this hot take. That whole thing is flushed down the toilet. Their big banner headline of the weekend, the year-end wrap-up of our smart political analysis of the chaos in the White House. It just got flushed down the toilet by a book that revealed it all to be garbage. I mean, they reported the happenings, I guess, the events correctly. It's just, what we pay the paper of record for is the interpretation of events, and they are stuck, whether it's their fault or not, I don't know. I don't know where else you begin with this stuff. But like I said, there's reporters out there. Most of them have no other context in which to write about the presidency except that it is a serious institution peopled by serious participants. And when it's not, they don't know what to do. Could you write for Manson a year of reinventing incarceration in ways that were once unimaginable? Charles Manson has discarded the conventions and norms established by his predecessors. Will that change the institution of murder permanently? Why would you run such a story? That's crazy. He's an insane person. He's carved a swastika on his forehead. Whereas this guy only paints himself orange and glues his hair down.
David, think about this. And I would ask you just to think about this part, about the New York Times. Consider how they covered Hillary Clinton as a presidential candidate.
Yes, right.
I thought they were unfair, but they were certainly tough. As I said, I think to the point of absurdity. And malpractice, but
yes,
whatever. At least they were being tough.
We will take nothing at face value from this person,
exactly.
Even though they've been Secretary of State.
Covering Hillary Clinton the way they did was in their wheelhouse. But then Donald Trump shows up, and they can't cover him the same. Well, they could actually, if they wanted to. They could be writing about the emoluments issue every day.
That's true.
Like they did the emails.
Right.
They could be talking about
but his emoluments. It even has the same first two letters.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying?
You don't have to change a lot of type.
They decided, well, I can't cover Trump the same way because, okay, well, you can't. And you're right. You know why? Because he's beyond anything we've ever seen. He's unacceptable. And frankly, that's a neutral take.
Yeah.
It's a neutral take. I mean, maybe, reinventing is a good word. Transforming.
Yes.
Those are positive things.
Yes.
You have to say he has degraded.
Yeah.
Or he has... the words to be used are there if they're willing to use them. The New York Times is not. The Washington Post, frankly, is. I mean, that's the difference between the two newspapers and the tone and in the way the reporters themselves talk about it. When you see Maggie Haberman or a New York Times reporter on TV, they treat Trump with kid gloves. You see a Washington Post reporter, and they will say, "This is nuts."
Yeah.
Listen, this is what's happening. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but it's nuts.
Yeah. It's been pretty amazing to watch, and it's a long-standing problem. Like I said, it goes for me personally. I'm sure it goes back further for others who've been watching for longer. For me, it goes back to the parallel of the torture issue. They literally didn't know what to do with the story that had been uncovered that the president and vice president had, and the president probably, vice president, the prime mover in it, had directed people to be scooped up off the street in Iraq, more or less at random, and tortured until they, quote unquote, admitted that Al-Qaeda was operating in Iraq and had been since before 9/11, and that's why we were there, and this was all connected. And they, even torturing people, they couldn't get this stuff said in a way that finally convinced everybody. And so we're sitting there looking at this, and the only thing that the traditional media is able to do with it is, how can we make a story out of this? The vice president is ordering political torture in another country that we've conquered more or less lawlessly. There's still no law and order. They're scooping up people off the street, trying to torture them into justifying retroactively their broader war on terror to cover up the fact that they screwed up Iraq so that they can win a second election in America. How do I write that story and not have everybody think I'm nuts? And the answer is, maybe you could write a story about Nancy Pelosi might have known and she didn't do anything. Yes, that's it. That's even dumber, nuttier story. What are you doing? How could you turn away from this? And all right, well, both sides authorize torture. But no, one's the vice president and the other is the Speaker of the House. That's a very powerful position, no doubt about it. But it isn't privy to the same information and doesn't issue the same kinds of orders. This is a very big story. Why would you turn away from it? Well, it's a lot easier for us to understand if it's, everybody does it. That way, that's how you can report on torture. Everybody tortures. That's why it's normal. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and you're right.
I mean, it's a much
in the
smaller.
Essence, but I would
focus.
still say go further. They've invented the New York Times, particularly. So listen, I point at the New York Times particularly because I think they're particularly bad about it, just generally, but also because of their, as I said, the importance of it. But I think they're just really bad at it. I think Dean Baquet has destroyed the paper. I think Carolyn Ryan is just terrible. And listen, if Hillary had been president, they would have done their New York Times Clinton thing that they do, and we would have bashed about it, but it would have been, normal. Donald Trump is an existential threat, and they don't cover the fact that he's an existential threat. That is
true.
Not good journalism. It's bad journalism. How can you miss the story that the President of the United States is insane, incompetent, unfit, and you're not conveying it to your readers? You're presenting it as transformation, reinvention, authenticity. That is failure as a journalist. Again, look, I'm not saying Trump is Hitler, but
right.
If you were a German newspaper and you covered Hitler with reinventing, transforming, etc.,
They did for a while.
Yeah, and they failed, didn't they?
Yeah, well, they're dead now.
They're dead now. But you get what I'm saying. I mean,
I
don't want to offend anybody by that comparison on any side. I know that truly the history's greatest monster. But Trump, as president of the United States, is really that. Is he that bad as Hitler? No. But that shouldn't be the bar we set for the president of the United States. Is he as bad as, I don't know, who do you want to think of? Mugabe or Mugabe killed a lot of people. Just think of a chaotic president who ruined his country. That's who he is.
Yeah. Well,
we're not getting that coverage from them.
That is true. I mean, the New York Times does have this particular problem, and I maybe it helps isolate where the problem lies. I did mention that there's also this James Risen story, which
very good story,
is
excellent story.
And it's enormous story, and I don't know whether it's something that's going to pay off reading on the air rather than digesting elsewhere. Yeah, but I mean, I grabbed just to make note of it a quick summary of it in one of the stupid morning media roundups that's out there in Politico, just to note for the record.
I want to second your recommendation. Whatever, forget about our discussion. Read it yourself as well.
Yeah,
it's at The Intercept. It's one of the best articles you'll read in a long time.
And it's an amazing thing all by itself that once you read the story, or if you remember the saga of it, it's amazing that it's now being written, and it has to, of course, run at The Intercept because it can't run at the New York Times. But yeah, I mean, for all the bashing that we just did, here's a story of the New York Times reporters doing fantastic work and revealing the George W. Bush presidency as not normal and outside of the bounds of accepted, of tolerances for how a presidency runs, how a country functions, and it being discovered and reported by top reporters at the New York Times, and it being spiked at the behest of the same White House that they had just reported on, with the cooperation of editors, just beginning with the story of, by the way, we've discovered that the current president of the United States, now seeking re-election, has been unconstitutionally, illegally, warrantlessly wiretapping within the United States and perhaps monitoring political enemies that way even. We just don't know what he's up to. This is a serious and impeachable offense. And the response at the editorial level to the entreaties of the White House was, can you please not report that until after we've been reelected to a second term, because you wouldn't want to affect the outcome of an election, wouldn't you? Which is I've never really grasped how that happened. What do you mean I wouldn't want to affect an election? Well, you mean unfairly? This would be fairly affecting an election. If the president is committing impeachable offenses... If
I didn't want to impact the election, I should just shut up and not publish.
Yeah, right. I mean, but her emails, that wasn't supposed to affect the outcome of an election? Well, we didn't mean for her to lose. I mean, well, she did, and now you've affected the outcome of election. Remember, by the way, that you allowed warrantless wiretapping to go on in 2003 and 4, and you didn't mention it until 2005 because you didn't want to negatively impact an election. Meanwhile, 10 years later, Donald Trump idiot supreme is president of the United States and threatening nuclear war for real on Twitter daily. And, well, gee whiz, I mean, the point is brave reporters have been asking him questions and being evaded and then later lied to by an incredibly accessible, by the way, Sarah Sanders, who's just doing an amazing job, just like Hope Hicks. How does she do it? She answers our questions every time. No comment. I'll get back to you. I don't know anything about that. What you heard is a lie, but an answer nonetheless. So she's so accessible. I don't know. The whole thing.
In some ways, your critique is so much more effective than mine. With that, I just spilt rage, and you're pointing out, yeah, they say things like that. That this is a very accessible. Peter Baker said that. Very accessible White House.
Yeah, did he? I actually was remarking yesterday where this comes from was the White House Correspondents Association coming out with their list, and I loved. I had to linger on it for like we must have stayed on the story for 15, 20 minutes, but 5 minutes on the fact that they broke their list down into positive points and less positive points. That's how far this goes.
Did you see Eric Wimple's interview with the president of the WHCA?
I didn't.
Margaret Tallov?
He was the one who circulated the excerpt, but no, I didn't realize that he had.
Then he interviewed her. It's the funniest humana interview you'll ever see.
And I think it exemplifies exactly the same problem, and it's not limited by any means to the New York Times, though they seem to, because they're the paper of record. Perhaps it's the most damaging from them.
Yeah, you're right. It's not limited to the Times, but they are, as I said, they're still the paper of record. I wish they weren't, but maybe they wish they weren't.
Maybe at this point.
And we can all work towards that goal of them no longer being the paper of record.
Yeah. I mean, I feel bad about not paying their subscription because I lean on them for so much of my content, and then I ask for people to help support that content. So that seems unfair. But yeah, when it comes to when I read their things, it's interesting, and I have to share it because they're a paper of record. That means a lot of people will have been reading it. But when I need like reporting that's like, I want somebody to strip the varnish off of this stuff. It's either Washington Post or very often McClatchy is the ones
McClatchy's
doing this
very
work
good. Yeah.
Inside. So, well, we'll take a break, a short breather, a minute breather to catch up and come back and rant some more. You're welcome to stay because it's that kind of day. If you like. Okay, amazing.
I'm in a snowstorm, so where am I going?
Right, okay, so you're getting hit with it. You can update us on that. All right, we'll be back in 1 minute from now. Go get a shovel. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're going to have to continue this discussion, it seems, because the president, he's crazy, and maybe Greg has something here. I like his idea about permission structures sometimes being what's necessary for people to break out of the box, and maybe I don't know whether it would be permission structure that gives the New York Times the flexibility to finally fess up about what's going on, or maybe it would be their competitive juices or just the economics of the situation where everybody is subscribing to newspapers that are willing to say what's going on and not to them. But eventually, I suppose they could come around, and I'm sure it's a mixed, a patchwork of stimuli that will get them to do it if they do it. But you were telling me during the break there's some things you wanted to bring up about.
Yeah, I had 2 points. You just raised a point in my head, but I'm going to save that one for the first thing. I think one of the funny things about the access argument, how you have to, the old beet sweetener idea.
Yeah.
Michael Wolff early in the year was very critical of the press being just basically the opposition to Trump.
Yes.
And he was very vocal about it. He went on all these shows, and he had fights with people and everything else. And, of course, he was writing a book. And he got access because I think he pretty much fooled all these guys because he was so critical of the press being in opposition to Trump.
Wouldn't that be amazing? I mean,
if that was his ruse, it must have been because he's written this book. He certainly doesn't sound like he's – if anything, he's – I think, frankly, you kind of think he's maybe embellishing a little bit to sell books. But I don't know Michael Wolff, and I don't know his reporting that well. I know him in the sense that I've seen him on TV and heard him. And he's very smarmy and thinks he's the greatest thing, and maybe he is. He's gonna sell 1 million books. That's for sure.
That's something.
But there's two things about the New York Times that you just talked about: permission slips in a couple of things.
Permission structures, yes.
Yes, and I think this is important in this context. The New York Times has been the paper of record. Republicans can go to war with the New York Times, but they can't ignore the New York Times. The New York Times actually has the power and the ability to say, I'm doing it my way because I am the New York Times too, and I will speak truth to power. You want to get mad at me? Fine. I'm still the New York Times. Let's go to war. New York Times shouldn't be afraid of a war with the White House. It shouldn't necessarily seek it, but it should do its job. This is the corrosive problem of the New York Times. If they won't stand up to it and do the right thing in terms of covering Trump, how's the little guy who's reporting from some local paper going to do it? It's truly a horrible example, and in that sense, you go back to that story that you told about the wireless wiretapping and holding this story. That was a terrible, egregious decision, but the Bush administration came hat in hand and begged them to do it. They should have said no. Let's be clear. But it wasn't that they were bullied into it. They acquiesced to something for whatever reason that's probably wrong. Here, the New York Times is behaving as if they are afraid of Trump, and they have to treat him with kid gloves. So give them an interview, which is useless anyway. I mean, there's nothing in that interview that we haven't heard 8 million times. I don't begrudge Schmidt the interview. Fine, you got it. You get the break news. How do you cover the interview, of course, is what was wrong. And then Peter Baker's year-end transformation stuff was just criminally bad. And it's the New York Times rolling over. So if the New York Times doesn't have permission to be tough, then what media outlet is going to? They're the paper of record.
Yes, I suppose that's a
possibility.
If
they can't do
a role model.
Can they? It's like when Walter Cronkite did the famous story on Vietnam. Mm-hmm. He was Walter Cronkite, and when he said it and when he did it, it's because he had permission. He was the guy that could stand up and do that.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Some lesser person at CBS wouldn't have been allowed to do it. They didn't have permission to come out and say, Vietnam's a complete mess. Trump's a complete mess. Who's going to be the guy? If the New York Times isn't going to say Trump's a complete mess, then where are we? Yeah. Well, who are you expecting to step up? Well, the Washington Post has stepped up, and thank God Jeff Bezos bought them for that in that sense, because it's not he doesn't own it to make money. I mean, obviously, he thinks it's an important institution. Apparently, he's left it alone. I don't think he had a particular vendetta against Donald Trump or Republicans in general. Bezos is a businessman. In fact, he's a cutthroat businessman. People have a lot of negative things to say about him.
Yeah.
But give the man credit. He valued the Washington Post as an institution enough that he put up what for him was money he found in his sofa, $25-30 million. I know that's nothing to him. You know that. That's peanuts.
Yeah, so maybe it's not so brave, but it's good. I mean, it's basically like a subscription for him.
It's not brave. It is brave in the sense that he is attacked.
I mean,
he's got lawyers who will. He's not afraid of him because he's got great lawyers who will destroy any attempts to retaliate against him. All right. And he's got $50 billion, which also. But okay. But my point is, he valued it, and you've got this institution that, frankly, in my view, is doing what the New York Times should have been doing.
Yeah. He didn't buy the Times.
He didn't buy the Times. So why is the Times doing it? And I don't think the Salzburgs are afraid of Trump. I don't think. Maybe they are. They're afraid. Maybe there's a money issue for them. I think it's just bad leadership. I think the editor-in-chief of the New York Times is an incompetent.
Yeah.
I have an Occam's razor explanation for the New York Times and Steinbeck had. I've had it throughout. I think it imbued their hiring. They took too many Politico people and didn't shape them up into being New York Times reporters. They basically Politico-sized, and this is the bad Politico when it was just really awful. Look, Haberman can be a good reporter when demanded to be that from her boss. they're letting her do whatever she wants. I mean, and she's doing it badly. So she hasn't been brave and great. She's been bad. Anyway,
well,
that's
yes.
enough of my rant.
People can't get enough, by the way, of your rants. Comments that have come in along the way. Although, let's see. This one goes back to Greg on chaos. There's perhaps I'll save that one. We'll revisit that one. But Karen letting us know she appreciated that. We have Jack Ox 48 who has tweeted and has been listening to the show fairly regularly and commenting fairly regularly over the past couple of weeks. Yes, Armando, you are correct. You'll be happy to know about that one. Armando and you, meaning me, are correct. That's good. I'm correct too. I have thought the same about the New York Times for quite a while, and I think the Washington Post is much better these days. And just thanking you very much for saying so. And the Wrath of France. You've incurred the Wrath of France. France 42 on Twitter saying Armando is the first person I heard say Trump, quote, Trump is nuts, and I haven't doubted him once since, not once. So good reviews,
David,
certainly.
I want to credit Kagro in the morning because you and I have talked about Trump, not only his insanity, but his criminality. And we did deep dives. No, we had good reporting that gave us that from McClatchy particularly.
I wasn't doing any diving. Yeah.
Pardon me?
Yes, I mean, to credit it properly, I wasn't the one doing the diving. They were the dives, the dumpster divers who came up with that kind of information for our analysis. But again, I guess this is an even better example of maybe what you're talking about. The problem with the Times, I got fed the same information as anybody else. In fact, they got better information than I got. And I came to the conclusion, right along with you, Trump is nuts and he's a criminal. And all of these things are not exaggerations and they're true. And you will come to realize it in time. And they were inferences from data that we got from other people's intrepid reporting. But that just, I guess, makes it even more egregious that New York Times reporters could be confronted with the same information, have the same opportunity to make the same inference. And I understand they're working under a different framework. They're accountable for their inferences in ways we're not. But you could have war-gamed this with the lawyers to a place where, how do I know that you could have? Because other newspapers are doing it, coming out and saying, yeah, Trump's nuts.
David,
he's a criminal.
David, the New York Times wrote a multi-part series based on a book published by Breitbart called Clinton Cash that explored the financial transactions of the Clinton Foundation. It was complete nonsense from beginning to end. The Uranium One story was absurd. The point being of there having been an appearance of conflict, and there maybe should have been better safeguards. All right, that's a one-day story, and it really should have been forward-looking. What if she's president? What happens? How do they do this?
Yeah,
they never did that with Trump. They talk about this tainted dossier and all this other nonsense. The dossier never got published by anybody.
That's
David
true.
Corn made reference to it in late October, but he didn't actually delve into too much of what was alleged there.
Yeah.
The New York Times on the front page wrote a story that was fed to them by Breitbart, by Steve Bannon. Where was their care there? Donald Trump was always much more of a threat, both in terms of his mentality, his criminality, the fact that he never released his tax returns.
And I was glad to see that addressed in the excerpts from the books. Yes.
This is crazy. We don't know at this point. Listen. I hope Robert Mueller's everything people say is in terms of his integrity, because he has the power to actually see everything. We heard reporting, though I haven't seen it much lately, that there were subpoenas issued or document requests issued to Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank's at the center of a lot of this, both as a money laundering operation for Russia, which, they pled guilty to. This isn't speculation or surmise. It happened, right?
Yeah.
Donald Trump started banking with Deutsche Bank when no other bank would bank with him.
Banking. Yeah, I mean, that's one way of describing what he was doing with Deutsche Bank. They're a bank, and money flowed from them to him. That's what you and I would think of as banking. I mean, when you get right down to it, that was just him, robbing them. But okay, I mean, that's
sure.
They make mistakes.
But listen,
Yeah.
Deutsche Bank kept doing business with them after they got in a lawsuit with them, which sounds like a phony baloney lawsuit at this point. Anyway, there was clearly something going on with Deutsche Bank, the Russians, and Donald Trump and his organization.
Yes.
It's just a fact. So. Maybe it was just shady dealings, and maybe it was criminal at the time. The point is, you carry it forward to the Russian interference in the 2016 election. How do you not cover this? How do you not cover it now? Where's the New York Times on that story?
I don't know.
Shouldn't they have 20 reporters digging all that up and giving us a big blow-by-blow 5-part series on Trump and the Russians? What's out there, what we know? Because it's not happening.
No. Well, not at the Times anyway. I don't know. Maybe it's happening elsewhere and missing it. But yeah, it's been a pretty huge disappointment. And the only explanation I've got for it, I'm going over the same ground again. I'm like Donald Trump. I'm going to tell you the same story again 30 minutes later.
I understand that. I'm just saying that these are things that we're not professional reporters.
No.
This isn't something that someone pays us to work 15 hours a day at. But we put together during 2015 and 2016 these dots that if we had resources, you and I would go and hire researchers and go dig up documents and do FOIA requests. And I feel like we put together something.
Yeah.
That explains.
It's probably true. That would have been something to do, certainly if that was the job. But yeah, it's just right now. It's just, hey, guess what I read in the newspaper, and so ought everyone else in the country to have read, and let's talk about it. And what else can you conclude from these data points? And I guess Robert Mueller's doing that job.
Well, and that's the whole point. I mean, to me, God, I hope he's not corrupt and just doing a show and is going to exonerate Trump with some whitewash. That would be, my God, that would be a gut punch, and then I don't know what we do as a country. But I think Mueller has to do his job to the point, and I assume he expects it, where Trump fires everybody, where he does the Saturday Night Massacre. And I think one of the people who's most intriguing right now, to me, and I've tweeted about him a little bit, is where's Rod Rosenstein's head right now?
Maybe we could enter that discussion
through the Paul
here,
Ryan
just
story,
because. Right? Okay, yes, because I don't know it, and Mad Hatter had tweeted to us earlier. He said to me, and Rosenstein went to the Speaker's office, and I haven't read that story, and I missed it, and I mean to go back and ask him.
It was reported yesterday that Rod Rosenstein and Christopher Wray, the FBI director, went to Paul Ryan's office and had a meeting, supposedly about the Russia investigation. Maddow had a single source tweet. I don't know if we're single versus double, blind sourcing, and whatever the heck the newspaper standards are these days. But they said it was about Devin Nunes.
Okay.
Now, Devin Nunes shortly after announced that he'd reached an agreement on his stupid document requests.
All right. Texted there.
So basically, I believe Ray and Rosenstein went to Ryan and said, "Tell Nunes to stop screwing with us, or we're going to do something or other." Presumably, because Ryan knew Nunes was doing all this stuff, so he could have stopped Nunes a long time ago. But apparently, it took this. This is my take on it.
All right.
There's no reporting going on here by me. That they dealt with the Nunes document request situation. I thought it might be something more serious, but I'm now more convinced that it was simply Ray and Rosenstein going up to tell Ryan to tell Nunes to cut it out.
Okay, that could be that could in fact be the case. But
Nunes announced that he's cutting it out, though. But he's supposed to say, "Now I'm going to get everything I asked for."
I see. All right, and I'm going to cut it out now. Like I'm going to recuse myself. If it's anything like your recusal, I guess you're not cutting it out.
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, he shouldn't be making any document requests, as you rightly note. But the recusal seems to be over. They might as well just announce it. Look, the House Intelligence Committee doesn't matter. We know it was a farce from the beginning. it was good for Adam Schiff to have a basis to go on TV and explain these things, and I'm happy for that, because Adam Schiff's a very effective person on the story, and he's very level-headed, and he speaks very well on it. But there's going to be a House Intelligence Committee report. There's going to be a Minority Report, almost certainly. Greg Sargent did some reporting on that. And do I expect better from the Senate Intelligence Committee? We'll see. The Senate Judiciary Committee, as you know, is a big joke. It's Grassley. Won't release the GPS off President's testimony transcript, even though everybody's asking for it. He said, well, come back and testify in open court. I said, fine. Sure. But release the transcript anyway, because you've said a lot of things that aren't true, and the transcript will prove it. Yeah. So they're hiding it, of course, because Grassley, who is always a hack in my view. I'd never understood people pretending he wasn't. But now when he's 87, he's more, whatever old he is, he's a doddering old hack who I don't know what he's about anymore. But really, it all comes down to Mueller. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Like you said, I am worried about that as a real possibility. That's what you were saying about the gut punch of having either an exoneration or just an inconclusive report of some sorts. And honestly, that's the way these things typically tend to go. Even when the report doesn't exactly exonerate anybody, when it becomes time for certainly we know that when it comes time for the political branches to then act and do something, they just balk. But we have a great example in the Iran-Contra investigation, where it's like, you're really this close to just saying, look, we've got the president here dead to rights on impeachable offenses, and we need to do something, or else we're going to have this problem over and over again. So what are you going to do? And then everybody just says, well, it's just going to end up being a party line thing, and that's going to make it a close call. And that's either some people justified it by saying that's bad for the country, and others said we don't have the votes to prevail in all this, so we shouldn't head down this road. But just generally speaking, that when high officials or famous people, we'll look in a totally different context. Maybe not entirely different context, given that we're talking about Donald Trump, but switching over just briefly to the other major story thread dominating the news at the end of 2017, the sexual predators and their harassment, high up famous people who have clout, who just don't get taken down for what they do. In other words, as Donald Trump put it, when you're a star, they let you do it. When you're a political star, generally speaking, they don't get brought down. Everybody at some point just throws up their hands and says, either if you're on the receiving end of the investigation, well, you're criminalizing politics is what you're doing here, or everybody does it, or that's just, presidents lie. What can you do? Occasionally they have to mislead people for the greater good. And again, dressing things up in the clothing, the suit and tie of normalcy, and dismissing, admittedly, lesser offenses against normalcy in the past, I suppose. But just when it comes time to finally slap somebody in irons, we tend to chicken out on these things.
You're absolutely right.
Historically, it's true.
And you could argue about the Iran-Contra thing being policy disputes and branch battles, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so let's leave that one aside. But what Donald Trump did was fire the FBI director because he was investigating him personally.
Yep.
Donald Trump has made numerous public statements attacking the investigation against him, attacking the intelligence community, denying the obvious, and asking for his political opponents to be jailed.
Yes.
This is beyond anything we've seen. I understand your point, and it's a fair one. People don't go to jail. Generally, certainly Nixon got pardoned, so he didn't even go to jail. But, a lot of other people in his administration did. Oliver North got out on a technicality. Poindexter the same. Mm-hmm. But Donald Trump has done things that Nixon didn't do. And he's done it, and we've all seen it, and it's in the open. That's why this intrepid reporting nonsense He went on Lester Holt. You remember the Saturday Night Live skit with Michael Che, I think is his name. And he plays the Lester Holt. He admitted that he did it because of Russia. Yes. He said, "We got him. It's over.
That's it, right?"
That's it, right? And he's right.
Yeah.
I mean, the joke is, it's funny because it's true.
Right.
That should have been it. He should have gone home.
That's
if
true.
Hillary Clinton, hell, if George W. Bush had done that,
yes,
it would have been an explosion. Impeachment hearings the next week.
And that many people suspect that was the reason that he insisted that Dick Cheney accompany him when he was being interviewed in the investigation.
Yeah,
that went on.
Of the disclosure of the
Valerie Plame stuff, because they thought he would do the same.
This is my point. We're not. You can't say I'm going to be neutral or I'm not going to editorialize when you basically put the bar on the floor. No, you buried it and you sent it to China with Trump. That's not right. Yeah. That's not doing your job. And it takes the New York Times to step up, or did, in my mind, because they are the paper of record. They had the power. They had the permission. And they failed.
Yeah. Well,
they've been they were a failure. Trump was elected in large part because of the New York Times and James Comey. I know there's a lot of other issues. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying the difference. I think the deciding factors were James Comey and the New York Times, because the New York Times basically led everybody, because it does. It was the paper of record. It is the assignment desk. What you see it on cable news. When the New York Times breaks a story, it becomes a big story on all the cable news. And they failed. Dean Beckett was a failure. History must record this, that the New York Times at the moment we needed it most was a complete and utter failure. And they had a brief right after the beginning of the last year. They were a little better, and then they just fell right back into it. And now they're the same, and they fight with everybody on Twitter who criticizes their reporting, because they'd rather fight with us than with the Trump administration. So that's where we are. And really it all comes down to Robert Mueller.
Yeah. Well, I guess our last hope there, and we've in a number of ways.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, no doubt about it.
Yes. You served with my father in the Clone Wars. And
that's correct.
And he did.
That's where we are.
That's how we found him.
On that happy note,
okay.
I'm going to hand you back your show and see how much shoveling I have to do.
Okay. Good luck. Stay warm there, and
it'll be all right.
Good.
I just got to shovel and deal with that.
All right.
Okay.
And you're in Florida.
No, I'm in New York.
Okay.
In case I had to. Though it did snow in North Florida.
That's the thing. All right, but you're in Southern Florida.
No, but I'm in New York.
Okay. Right. Very good. Thanks, Armando. Well, that was true. Everyone appreciates a good Armando rant, not least of all Armando. He feels a lot better now. Now he's ready to face the day and take on the tasks at hand, and it seems like a lot of you enjoyed it as well. Lots of other commentary happening along the way, perhaps somewhat different direction that we can take. I guess after our third break, it's been a hell of a day, not a very organized day. It's chaos here on the Kagro in the Morning Show, but it's a strategy in that we don't have a different one. And I do daily make the decision. Mine is a strategy. I daily say, I'm not going to take the time to get organized today because that's not fun. Whereas doing the show this way is fun, and it's entertaining, at least to the small segment of people we're able to attract to the show. And they're loyal listeners at that, so we'll continue down this path. Let's see. What have I grabbed a couple of tweets here that look like they might be good directions to take after this next break. Philip Bump tweeting, Trump has had to pretend that Democrats disrupted his fraud commission to hide their misdeeds because it's the only way to keep the charade going. That seems like a pretty good interpretation of the Washington Post's reporting on the dissolution of the voter fraud commission. Andrew Kaczynski, likewise, tweeting, if you missed yesterday, the Milo fan who would back up Nikki Haley at the UN, I guess had been appointed as a deputy to Nikki Haley at the UN, has had to restart the nominations process. That brings us to a procedural issue that we can report on and remind everybody of lessons that we have imparted in the past with respect to how the nominations game works. Plus, we have the additional benefit of having the opportunity to take another shot, sort of, at Milo Yiannopoulos along the way. That seems like it's worth doing all by itself. And then we'll catch up on a few other items and perhaps deeper exploration. We may circle back to doing the same damn thing all over again, just like Donald Trump himself will do in half-hour increments. And maybe we're guilty. I have always admitted all along that I'm guilty in many ways of the same sort of scattered thinking as Donald Trump, although I do think I maintain most of my faculties. If I could play as much golf when I'm older as he's able to do, then I would consider myself a overwhelming success. And that's, I guess, what's kept him going from day to day. He gets to do whatever it is he wants to do. No one has been able to make him live a poor person's life, despite the fact that he has no actual capital. But, I guess if you're into that, then you must have motivated yourself. Welcome back to the last segment of today's Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Man, I don't know how we're going to wrap this day up. I cut myself off. I mean, I had to as we went to break, but just to circle back and see if I can make some sense of what I was trying to blurt out before the break. What I meant to say here was, I guess if you've lived your entire life just A, never having been told no about anything, and B, delusional and idiotic as you are, you just keep stumbling into, if not success after success, then certainly survival after, if you can survive after failures and survive in a way, you get to live the lifestyles of the rich and famous even without being rich and there being no particular reason why you would be famous. I guess that serves as you're your own motivational speaker, I guess, is what and I would consider you, I guess, relatively qualified to do motivational speaking if you just were that kind of survivor, even if it was just by accident every time. That is to say, I could understand why you would think you have lessons to impart to other people, why you think you're a valuable member of society and people should listen to you. I've never failed to the point where I've actually found myself floating at the level in life that I deserve. I have always lived far better than I deserved, and that must be because I'm a worthy person and have lots of skills versus I was given $200 million and I was never able to convince everybody that I had lost it all. And so therefore I was able to continue playing millionaire and billionaire games and scratch the necessities of life at that level out from grifting, cheating, stealing, whatever it was from others along the way. And that worked for me, and why can't it work for you? That's my version of the motivational speech from Donald Trump. I mean, the guy bumbled his way into being president of the United States. How do you convince him now? I mean, you would never be able to convince him of anything now because he's suffering from dementia. But if he weren't, I don't know how you would convince him that he was really a bumbling fool. He would point to the presidency and say, what do you make of that? Do bumbling fools become president? There we are back to the New York Times problem here. Why can't they report on him as a bumbling fool, an idiot, an incompetent, a man in cognitive decline who never deserved the presidency, was never up to the job on his best day, and is now in some of his worst, and still we won't say so? And the answer is, look, man, in the history of the United States, we've come to think that bumbling fools don't get elected president. It doesn't happen that way, even though there's been a good dozen mainstream wide-released Hollywood movies that explain, we could, in fact, bumble our way into this. Absolutely. The Candidate didn't explain it to you. Now, that guy wasn't by any means as incompetent as Donald Trump is at his job. But, okay, so fine. That didn't convince you. What was the one that Warren Beatty did again? Bulworth, right? I mean, now, admittedly, that would be a lot harder to convince you because that seemed like a less serious film, let's say, than The Candidate. But there's a whole genre of films explaining, the presidency or high office can be, one, you can bumble your way into it. Two, it can be occupied by an empty suit if surrounded by sufficiently professional staff. I guess that would be the candidate. That serious mental illness can be covered up or explained away as authenticity, Bulworth. Or, for instance, what was the other one I was thinking of? Like a Wag the Dog style movie, right? You can create a war out of nothing. That, too, a lesson we should have learned from the movies. There's a million things. Gosh, Hollywood can just teach us anything. Anyway, let's see. Other tweets I wanted to revisit because they contained good news, that is to say, interesting news, or made good observations. Let's see. Mark Sumner just tweeted a few minutes ago. Let's see. What made something like Wolf's book possible wasn't simple incompetence. Even if Trump's team was, as he pretends, made up of outsiders there to sack the establishment, they would still defend Trump. Interesting observation made there. Probably more to come during the course of the morning. Let's see. Kate Sherrill just sharing with us the tweet from earlier in the morning. She says, Michael Wolff says that he has recordings of the interviews to back up what's in the book. And I would dearly love to hear some of those, because there were definitely some initial disputes, including from some of the more serious players in this stupid chaos, by which I mean competent players. Believe it or not, there were a few inside the inner circle who dispute the version put forth by Michael Wolff. But Kate shares Natasha Bertrand's tweet on the subject from very early in the morning. But basically, I'm making the point that there are some tapes. So we're going to want to hear those. By the way, the storyline that Anthony Scaramucci is somehow going to make a return to the White House lives on. We'll see whether there's any truth to it eventually. I would laugh, but it's entirely possible. Remember, though, there was a time when Trump was toying with bringing Mike Flynn back to the White House as well. So, that guy's crazy. He might not have any idea what he's talking about, and he might bring back Scaramucci not because it's some sort of brave stance against presidential norms, but because he's a freaking idiot who's got no idea how badly he's doing in office. I don't even know what to tell you about that. Let's see. Other things I set aside here. Of course, this mentioned earlier, but I did grab Mark Knoller's tweet. How does he do in the normalization game? Through his lawyers, President Trump demands Michael Wolff and his publisher, quote, cease and desist from any further publication, release, or dissemination of their book on President Trump, citing false and or baseless statements in their book. That, of course, we know already that the president was issuing this cease and desist letter and was threatening to sue. But just for a second, for the record, we'll try and grasp all the issues swirling around this. I mean, this is something that Trump used to do all the time in private business, and it was bluster then, but it was something that he did and that he could do unencumbered by constitutional implications. But as president of the United States, this is one of those lovely areas where the controlling or the controlling understanding, if not controlling law, or the controlling interpretation of law at this point has lots of gray areas and can turn on a dime. And things that you were taught in law school can turn out to be untrue. Well, that was always possible. If the Supreme Court, 5 justices, even if they're, idiotic, empty suits put there by President Trump or someone like him, or a team assembled over decades, whatever it is, even if there's no conspiracy at all behind stocking the court with arch conservatives in their late 30s and early 40s, 5 people, through whatever circumstances, come together and decide, that's not the law anymore. Well, then that's not the law anymore. That's the way our game goes. It's not supposed to happen quite that simply, but it does from time to time. So the question is, can Trump, as president of the United States, do things that he was comfortable doing and was allowed to do as a private businessman, quote unquote businessman. I don't know what his business was. Another part of his career as a motivational speaker, the idea that he was a successful businessman. Why? He wasn't. He didn't do things. The idea that he was a creator, a maker, as Paul Ryan might have put it a few years ago. All he does is license his name to things at this stage of the game. Was he ever a success? Debatable, maybe. But anyway, he holds himself up as a lifelong success when instead he's just been a hanger-on and grifter living off of accumulated piles of money of other people who don't mind losing significant chunks of it, many of them because they stole their chunks of money along the way too. Easy come, easy go. It's a good philosophy, really. And it's made his life possible. But what are we talking about here? As a private businessman, of course, he could sue somebody putting out a book full of supposedly false and or baseless statements, because it's just one private citizen, however powerful that person appears, because everyone has in common the misunderstanding that that person has limitless resources and can sue you all day long. But, despite the fact that you're on an uneven playing field, a private businessman can sue a publisher and threaten to follow up with a libel suit. When the President of the United States is doing it, it raises different issues, and there's some prior restraint type issues. There's constitutional implications to the chief executive of the United States government telling the free press, you're not allowed to print that because it's personally embarrassing to me, even though it's false. Now you have to, walk a tightrope here. All these things are false, and that's why it's embarrassing. It's understandable. It's not irreconcilable. But as President of the United States, entrusted with the chief executive power of the government here, you're not supposed to even threaten to pull that trick. Although, again, gray area, there are certain places in which you can. If you can make a court believe that there are national security implications involved, there are circumstances in which the courts will allow prior restraint, though they're very reluctant to do so, and they say it has to meet the highest tests, et cetera, and they're very strict about these things. It happens. Now, to date, he hasn't asserted that there's any national security implication. But remember, he's a simpleton, Donald Trump is, which, that's a whole other issue that we could be discussing. It occurred to me at the beginning of the show, I thought we would be discussing this more. By the way, the forgotten men of America, the forgotten men and women of America that Trump was tweeting about just the other day, those idiots who are diehard Trump supporters is how you and I refer to them. I was just thinking about this, like, how do you like to wake up to that payoff? Like when this is the reason that the forgotten men and women of America are generally forgotten by the bulk of America. It's because if you say to them, well, I'll tell you what, you don't want to be forgotten. I feel bad about forgetting you. I'm a progressive person. Let's hear your voice. What do you have to say? Who do you want to be president? I pick a demented dotard. He speaks for me. Jeez, this is why we forget you guys. This is all right. Well, me and my big mouth, we promised that we would let you have your choice for president. So here we go. Yay, Donald Trump is it. Now we find out that the guy who held you in such thrall, you were coming to rallies for him, unending, even after his inauguration. He's still having rallies, and I'll do anything for Donald Trump, and I wear my Make America Great Again hat. And in a fight as between Steve Bannon and this guy, I'm going to go with this guy, even though he has none of his mental faculties left. That's how much trust I have in him. Good choice. I wish we could re-forget you, Mr. and Mrs. Forgotten Men and Women of America. Anyway, this is why we don't put people like that in charge, typically speaking. And people who aren't like that are able to understand issues like the problem it creates when someone attempts to use the power of the presidency of the United States to prevent the free press from publishing a book that at least is arguably true and for which there are receipts, apparently, including audio recordings of all these statements, tries to prevent it from being published, period. Just even asking for the thing to be blocked for any reason is just sort of a simplistic idiot's view of what's allowable by anybody, but much less the President of the United States. I think this also goes to the ongoing story of Donald Trump. His administration basically has been a dumb person's idea of what the president is empowered to do, saying things like, I have, what did he say? I have total control or the absolute right to do anything I want with the Department of Justice. Or thinking that you can block publication of a book because it's embarrassing to you. And I imagine that at some point somebody will say to him, no, you really can't block the publication of a book just because it's embarrassing to you. But if there was a national security claim, that would raise certain issues that we might arguably be able to leverage to block publication of the book or parts of the book or something like that. Or at least we would look non-foolish arguing about, could we please move to that? And again, Donald Trump, simpleton that he is, would have no difficulty concocting such a thing. And he's already done it. I mean, he's already tweeted as much. Basically, he's made it clear many times on Twitter, and we could dig up any number of examples of his insisting that when things are bad for me, they are bad for the country because I'm president, because you forgotten men in America, men and women of America have chosen me rightly, wrongly, legally, illegally, whatever, as your president. I'm synonymous with the country. Things that go poorly for me make other countries look askance at us. They take us less seriously. And as leader of the free world, it's very important that we be taken seriously. That would be an astonishing acknowledgement for him to make at some point. And by the way, puts him in opposition to the anti-globalist crowd that Bannon imagined until yesterday that he led. The argument is we're so important and so important that other countries take us seriously and respect us that disrespecting me personally is in fact a national security issue. And there's a level at which that could even be interpreted as true, but perhaps for a different president, somebody who was already enjoyed the respect, for instance, of the rest of the international community or something like that, or you had some reason to believe was going to act in accordance with that trust and respect. This guy, I have no reason to believe that, and so I can't I can't make this test work for you. But I'm sure that in his mind and in the mind of a lot of his advisors, there's a legitimate, it's not legitimate, but they think it's a legitimate claim to national security style prior restraint. And what would be amazing, and the kind of stomach churning gut punch of a conclusion that Armando and I worried about with the Mueller investigation just a few minutes ago, the version of that here would be a court finding that, yes, there is a national security issue, just, maybe not exactly as Trump himself described it, but something more nuanced and complicated, but probably still wrong, that a conclusion they reach and can dress up in the language of, actual legal doctrine. Though we may disagree with it, the basis is this, and you draw a different conclusion from these precedents than I do, but I'm the judge and you're not. And so what I say goes until you can appeal it and overturn it. But if it's the Supreme Court, there's no appeal from it. 5 of us have agreed that personally embarrassing a president involved in high-level negotiations with XYZ is, in fact, a national security issue. And so, therefore, this book can be prevented from being published. And Donald Trump would come away from that with the understanding that his refusal to change the way he operates as between having been a private, quote-unquote, businessman and president of the United States is in fact justified. Nothing has changed. I get to do exactly what I thought I was going to do. My stupid person's understanding of the power of the presidency was in fact correct. I wanted the book stopped, and the book has been stopped. Yes, but it was stopped One, incorrectly, and two, for very, very different reasons than you asserted. I don't know. I didn't know what the reasons were. That's what I pay lawyers for, okay? They're the ones who are supposed to deal with this stuff. All I know is that book shouldn't be published, and the President of the United States is a very powerful person, and he should be able to stop whatever he wants to stop. I can order those things. I can order you assassinated by the CIA if I want to. That'll stop the publication of your book. I could order the CIA to assassinate everybody who reads it. I swear to God, I could totally do that. I promise you I could make it happen. And, the machinations that are used to make it look like he's right. I mean, think about how stupid he is in assuming that he's right about other things. Yesterday he was tweeting, no airplanes crashed in 2017. I did it. It was me being tough on the airline industry. He was, of course, the opposite of tough on the airline industry. Did nothing to address safety issues in the airline industry, but he's convinced himself, just as we learned, he convinced himself in the Wolf book. One of the most interesting excerpts published by the New York magazine was the one in which on election night he's shocked to find out that he won, because the whole lead up to that moment in the article, the excerpting of the book, is how the assumption among the campaign inner circle was that they were going to lose the election, but they were in it for the fame anyway, so losing was okay with them. They were totally prepared to lose, and then they won, and Trump ends up looking like he had seen a ghost when he realizes, oh crap, I'm going to have to be president. But then by the end of the night, he totally convinced himself that he deserved it and really was capable of being president, just as he would convince himself based, say, on a dumb but legal-looking construct from a court ruling that he could that he would get the outcome he wanted, that he was right in his reasoning ahead of time, saying, well, the reason that the president can block publication of a book like this is because the president is awesome and can do whatever he wants, and he's never going to understand the legal arguments that led to this, nor the danger of the implications of those legal arguments being upheld, but he doesn't care. I mean, we saw him do it not only with the airline thing, but what else did we just... Oh, yes, right, like he thinks he's, with his travel ban, his Muslim ban, nailed it, got it right. Eventually, like on the 15th try, he sort of kind of got parts of it to be upheld by a circuit court, and we'll see how well it goes on appeal from there. But that was, of course, preceded by 10, 15 failures in court, and embarrassing, horrific failures, most of which were engineered by Steve Bannon in part. Anyway, by the way, if you still think he's a political genius and all this, you're not listening to the show if you think that. But, does Trump think that he made mistakes even along the way in his Muslim/travel ban? No, I got what I asked for. Now, he didn't, and part of the game is him just justifying after the fact, well, the reason I got this version of it is eventually I decided it myself. I wanted it this way and limited in this way. But not because you were forced into that by dozens of court losses along the way. But one part of him, the delusional part of him, forgets about that. The senile part of him forgets about the rest. And the egomaniac parts of him justify the rest of it along the way, too. The guy is never going to think he doesn't deserve to be president. And to the extent that he felt that way during the evening of November 8th, he has already forgotten, not only because that's the kind of person he is and he puts those thoughts aside and buries them beneath his own motivational thinking about himself, but also he happens to be increasingly senile and wouldn't remember it anyway. So anyhow, there's an awful lot to unpack from the day's events. Probably won't even get to the dissolution of the Voter Fraud Commission until later in the week. But man, there was a lot. I'm glad that we at least got some of those things mentioned and on the record. And I see we're getting down towards the end of today's show. Not surprising that we talked our way to the finish of this one so quickly. But let's see. Anything else that we want to squeeze into the last couple minutes of the show? Yeah, probably. Wow. We're never going to get to some of these things, so we might as well enter them on the record. There was this one. Rosalind McGregor chimes in again. Hi, Rosalind. It's good to hear from you again after some time. She sent me she says, a great article about the low-level public officials' warnings on Flint's water crisis. And yes, like the electricity crisis in Puerto Rico, still ongoing and still of much longer standing than the issues in Puerto Rico, of course. But yeah, I guess we're finally going to start seeing the truth bubble its way to the surface in stories like that. This is from Dome Magazine. What is Dome Magazine? Is it the State House, like the dome on the State House there in Michigan? Probably. Yeah, covering the people, issues, and events shaping state politics and policy. Very interesting. And we're not going to be able to enter it on the record in full today, but perhaps we can revisit this on a future show. In the meantime, I wanted you to be able to have the article available to you. Thanks, Rosalind, for sending it our way. I'll share that with you in the roundup, and Scott will help put that one together. Let's see. Oh, yes, you know what? Here, let's get this one on. This is a short tweet storm yesterday from Judd Legum, who makes a very good case here. I mentioned to you yesterday, without really giving enough attention to just how serious it was, the new line of attack against Mueller's grand jury, and that it was racist in nature, and that the basic argument was, well, there are black people on the grand jury. Maybe even all of them are black people. And you know how they are with respect to Donald Trump and in other ways, because I'm a huge racist. Well, if it occurred to you that this was very Trumpian in its motivations because of the racism, you may have been onto something. Judd Legum thinks you are. He has this to say, by way of introducing it rather personably and offhandedly. Hey, everyone, he says. The person anonymously leaking racist attacks on the Mueller grand jury sounds a lot like Trump. And it's illustrated here with a photo of, you'll figure it out, and we don't have that much time to delve into it. But here is the Think Progress write-up of it, also available. Is it easier to read through that or through the tweet storm? Let's see. Probably the tweet storm we'll be able to get through in the few minutes we have left. So it does sound an awful lot like Trump. And here's the point. Here's the quote at issue. Quote, the grand jury room, it was said, the grand jury room looks like a Bernie Sanders rally. That was a pretty dumb description of it. My source said, maybe they found these jurors in central casting or at a Black Lives Matter rally in Berkeley, California, that is, of course. Well, where did that quote appear? That was, of course, the quote given to page 6. You remember that Joan McCarter identified it correctly as, this is where this was coming up from, the page 6 from, what is it, the New York Post that runs that. A weird place to bring that complaint, to be sure. But Judd points out that phrase, that central casting. And remember, we just learned about how frequently Trump repeats the same phrases. We have heard that one before, the central casting thing. That is a Trumpism for sure. It's a Trump signature, as he says. He uses it constantly. MSNBC wrote about that in particular last February. His fondness for the phrase has been noted multiple times in the failing New York Times, according to even Armando agrees with the failing New York Times. And so there's been articles written about why he's so preoccupied with central casting. Well, there's also a video of Trump using central casting over and over again repeating himself within a short time cycle. Judd continues and says, the person who the anonymous source leaked to, the New York Post's Richard Johnson, is a personal friend of Trump's. He was a judge for Trump when Trump ran the Miss America pageant. Page 6 is a weird place to leak details of a grand jury composition, but it's also a place that Trump has been obsessed with for decades. That was where we once read that story about him complaining about the restaurant renovation story. Remember that? Anyway, Judd concludes, that said, there is no definitive proof that Trump is the source, but it is either Trump, someone who mimics his speech patterns after spending a lot of time with him, or someone trying to make it seem like it was Trump. That is a pretty solid case. Can you imagine if we were at the stage where President Trump was calling friendly reporters and leaking quote-unquote information about the grand jury investigating him? Could there be any more solid evidence of obstruction of justice? Well, I wish we could cough that evidence up, but I guess the reporter is too friendly with Trump. But if that ever comes out, I don't know what you do with this guy but impeach him. But of course, you know how these things tend to come out, Iran-Contra and all that. I'll be right back after this announcement.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Once again, overambitious and trying to cram in one more story on today's show. That's what I like to do with my time. But don't forget, please don't, I don't see how you could. West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is coming up next. Lots more stories, lots more insight into things we already discussed, things we didn't discuss, things we'll never discuss, because they have a much broader view than we do. Do stay tuned.